Yeah, to be honest, this week sucked. We had a ton of injuries. We had a ton of disappointing players. We'll talk about everything. First, starting off with Dallas. It'd be bad enough if CeeDee Lamb was dealing with a shoulder injury, but now you have Dak Prescott with a hamstring. Sounds like this is actually concerning. Sounds like Dak may miss time here. And with that assumption, if we get a report on Tuesday heading into the waiver wire that Dak Prescott's going to miss a couple weeks, you can go ahead. You could probably drop Dak because he was barely better than a streaming quarterback option anyway. And obviously, if Dak were to miss and instead you were to have Cooper Rush in here at quarterback, you lower expectations with everybody in this offense. Now, the bright spot you have here in Dallas is obviously Rico Dowdle looks great. Dowdle, we had as that buy low candidate a couple weeks back, looking real good right now, where if you're actually looking at this chart from PFF, you will see that Dowdle plays a career high about 75% of the snaps. Now, obviously, Zeke was benched for disciplinary reasons, but Ezekiel Elliott's been horrible this season. Dalvin Cook's been horrible this season. Dowdle's the only guy that's shown anything here. I mean, Dowdle gets 55 snaps in comparison to Dalvin at 6. So Dowdle looks to be most likely a must-start running back every week going into the future. Outside of if you have no Dak Prescott, obviously the offense will be much worse. Going over to what we have with the receivers, Lamb will still be a must-start guy even if Dak does miss, but obviously lower expectations down from Lamb from being a top 3 wide receiver to instead probably being more so a high-end wide receiver 2 if you were to have no Dak Prescott. Jake Ferguson does see 10 targets. Great day for Ferg. But also we need to be on the lookout for Brandon Cooks to be coming back in shortly, which will spread out the targets that you're seeing across the board here. Going over to Atlanta, I thank God pivoted from Caleb Williams as my streamer this week over to Kirk Cousins in the Flock League. Cousins, you get the 3 passing touchdowns, a super efficient play as well. This is despite Drake London actually only playing 11 snaps, then going down with the hip injury. But Cousins still remains the streaming quarterback, right? Negative 11 rushing yards in this game. Ultimately, you have 0 rushing upside, so you're just streaming him based off matchups. Bijan Robinson gets vultured from Tyler Algier, which is really frustrating. But underlying this, Bijan still has himself a great day. You still have the 7 receptions, the 19 carries, the 140 total yards. Bijan remains a must-start RB1 every single week. And going over to the receivers here, Darnell Mooney will be an absolute must-start option every week, regardless of matchup, in any game in which you have no Drake London. Because beyond London and Mooney, this is an extremely thin wide receiver core. I mean, Ray McCloud ends up seeing the majority of snaps outside of those top 2 guys. But ultimately, I'm not super excited about McCloud. I think Mooney would be the only guy that's viable. Pitts is horrendous today, but to be honest with you, I'd be more excited about Kyle Pitts and any game environment in which you don't have London. Now, going over to the Bills, we had the surprise news this morning that you weren't going to have Amari. Obviously, Josh Allen was a must-start quarterback every week. Before Amari got there, Josh Allen still must-start quarterback every week. After Allen comes through with the 3 passing touchdowns. Looking over at James Cook, I was really excited to play James Cook this week, considering the fact it's a good offense. They were favored by like 8.5 points in this game. And obviously, you have receiving usage on top of a red zone role. But not a super inspiring day. You do have the 10 carries and the 6 targets. But Ray Davis steals the show with the 63-yard receiving touchdown. Ray Davis was a running back that you needed to have on your roster if he's on your waiver wire because of the handcuff appeal that he has if anything were to occur specifically to James Cook. But still, you're not starting Ray Davis in any game environment in which James Cook's healthy. And then going over to the receivers here, Keon Coleman actually injures his wrist as well. So him and Amari are both dealing with injuries. So if that's the case, if next week you potentially have no Keon and you have no Amari, Khalil Shakir will be an absolute must-start receiver. Shakir this week, you only get the 6 receptions, 50 receiving yards, which is whatever. And obviously, Dalton Kincaid expands his target share as well with all the injuries that you have. Now, going over to what we have with our next offense, I'm so freaking done with Jalen Waddle. We'll get to him in a second. First up, starting with Tua. Tua has no rushing upside. You're just betting on passing volume. And again, he's in a very similar mold to Kirk Cousins. You're streaming him based off matchup. This wasn't a good matchup for him. Going over to Devon Achane. I mean, last week, what we had seen is we had seen Raheem Mostert with the goal line roll. Mostert vulturing multiple touchdowns from Achane. And that led me to think that Achane was a mid to low end RB1 rather than a mid to high end RB1. And 100% we can say at this point, I mean, if you're looking at talent profile, if you're looking at efficiency, there may be 1 to 2 to 3 running backs more talented than Achane in the NFL right now. Achane is absurd. He is the new age Kamara. This is typically what you would exactly expect from like a 22, 23-year-old Alvin Kamara. You get the 12 carries, 63 rushing yards, and the rushing touchdown. You get the 8 receptions, 58 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. It's beautiful. This was in a tough matchup. And we have seen now every single game with Tua under center that you do have Achane coming through and giving you that high-end RB1 performance. And we will be moving Achane probably inside the top 3 of our running back rankings rest of season. Obviously, the rest of season ranks will be updated on the website on Sunday night, and they will be updated on YouTube probably Monday morning. I'll get you those videos. But anyway, going over to what we have at wide receiver, you end up coming away with the decent Tyreek Hill performance. Tyreek still hasn't given you the high-end wide receiver 1 game that we would hope for. And freaking Jalen Waddle. I obviously started Waddle in the Flock League, and I apologize if I told you to start Waddle. You had 0 points until the very, very end of the game here. So it's extremely difficult to be excited and to trust him going into the future. We get really lucky with the receiving touchdown at the end of it. So I don't think Waddle's anything close to a must-start wide receiver at this point. Now going over to our next offense, we are going to be looking at Denver. Denver was the trap offense this week. We talked about this previously, but if you were looking at sportsbooks, they were projecting out this to be a complete blowout. They were projecting this to be a bottom 5 offense. So we were saying you got to bench guys like Bo Nix. Bo Nix wasn't super interesting. Now, of course, with that being said, Bo Nix kind of saves the day with the receiving touchdown here. But again, going into the future, Bo Nix is still just a streaming option that's interesting based off matchup. And this was not the matchup to play him against Baltimore. Looking at the running back usage, I don't know, the snaps are going down. I don't want to overreact here, of course, because this game was a blowout. I did also trade Javonte to Sal right before the Sunday slate. He needed the production. I was going to be benching him. You do have the 42 receiving yards, which kind of saves the day. But yeah, I just think that this offense, people got a little bit too ahead of themselves on because of a good matchup against the Panthers last week and then against the Saints with everybody injured 2 weeks ago. And then Courtland Sutton has himself a phenomenal day. Realistically speaking, am I super excited to go through and start Sutton going into the future? And for me, probably not, to be completely honest with you. But obviously, got to give the man his props. I mean, phenomenal performance. I had to play against this dude this week, so maybe I'm just salty. I'm going over to the Ravens. The Ravens look like probably the top AFC contender outside of Buffalo and Kansas City. Super excited to watch Patrick Mahomes tomorrow night. And of course, if you wanted to check out any of those picks on Underdog for Monday night, you can actually get a free Patrick Mahomes pick more than less than half a total yard with promo code FLOCK. Code FLOCK is also going to get you a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And on top of that, you're going to be getting a free team review in the streams that we are doing every single night. And if you wanted something to pair that free Patrick Mahomes pick, what I'm looking at is I'm going to be looking at Bucky Irving for fewer than 52.5 total yards. But to warn you, I am 0 for 17 in our recommendations for Underdog on YouTube this year. So probably want to fade me on that. But I'll leave the link in the description and comment section. Looking at Baltimore, everybody eats. Obviously, it's a game where they score 40 plus points. Lamar goes out there. You get the 3 passing touchdowns, 280 passing yards off of only 19 pass attempts. Derrick Henry gets you the multiple rushing touchdowns. Zay Flowers dominates with 127 receiving yards and multiple receiving touchdowns. If you're looking at the underlying usage here, Deontay Johnson only runs 6 routes. So obviously we are going to assume that Deontay Johnson's a little bit more involved going into the future. I honestly still stand by. I think that Zay Flowers is going to be a boom bust option that we can't trust that wide receiver every week, knowing that this is a team that wants to run the ball, presumably, while at the same time, they will have Deontay taking a few more targets in games in week 10 onwards. So I wouldn't mind at all seeing what you could get for Flowers after this. But clearly, phenomenal game. Lamar, the QB1 still. Derrick Henry, top 3 running back still. Not much changes. And then I guess we can talk about Andrews. I mean, with Andrews, we had previously mentioned it that The touchdown rate was super unsustainable. He wasn't anything more than a tight end 2, not somebody that you can consistently rely upon going into the future. Going over to the Chargers, we have the big Quentin Johnston day. You'll love to see it for my best ball teams, but reality starting off at quarterback here, Justin Herbert, still just a streaming option, not somebody that you can rely on every single week. 0 rushing upside, of course. Somebody with a lot of rushing upside is going to be J.K. Dobbins. If we are looking at Dobbins here, this is a running back that's playing on all 3 downs. This is a running back that's getting receiving usage. It's a good offense. You start Dobbins every single week, regardless of the matchup. Ladd McConkey, you have the 7 targets. Ladd's still the wide receiver 1 here. Nothing changes in that fashion. But it is not necessarily a spot where Ladd's seeing 10 plus targets consistently. So he is just a borderline flex play. Really the only guy that you need to start every single week here in Los Angeles, of course, is Dobbins. I'm going over to Cleveland. So we are talking about Jameis regressing significantly, talking about the potential interceptions that were dropped in the Baltimore game. Those interceptions come through. This is a game that is pretty much just the vintage Jameis performance. 46 pass attempts. You get 235 passing yards, 3 interceptions. It's horrendous. It gives very little hope for somebody like Nick Chubb. Going over to the receivers here, Tillman sees 11 targets. Tillman's just been so much more efficient than any other wide receiver at this point. Jerry Jeudy has 11 targets in this offense as well. Elijah Moore sees 9. So, I mean, if you're looking at the target share for Tillman, I mean, you see 11 targets out of a potential 46 pass attempts. So you have like a 23% team target share in an offense that we don't expect to be great, which historically is not something that you are excited about in fantasy. But Tillman continues to give strong performances after strong performances after strong performances. I mean, he's been dropping 20 plus weeks every single week you've had no Amari. And looking at David Njoku, I mean, with Njoku, nothing really changes, right? I mean, this is a tight end where you see 42 routes run. So you probably just have to continue to play him as a mid tight end 1. Going over to the Saints, Derek Carr not rosterable. Alvin Kamara still a top 3 running back. Nothing changes there. Taysom Hill gets a rushing touchdown. It's great because, of course, your boy got to play against Taysom Hill this week, so that's super exciting. But Chris Olave goes down with yet another concussion. He has to go to the hospital. Sounds like everything is fine from a health perspective. Now, of course, with that being said, there's no way in hell Chris Olave is playing next week. I would assume that he's probably not playing week 11 either. I believe the Saints have a week 12 bye. So the assumption is, especially with the Saints team that is playing for absolutely nothing, that is Olave probably misses the next 3 weeks. I thought Olave was a must-start guy. I mean, but obviously when you go down only 8 snaps into it, there's just not much that you can say here. Very sad. Kind of hope that Olave gets traded to a team with a better quarterback. Going over to Carolina, Bryce Young, still bad. Nothing changes. Chuba Hubbard still dominates with no Jonathan Brooks. Nothing really changes there. Hubbard still remains a must-start running back every single week that you have no Brooks. Now, we already have a report saying that Jonathan Brooks will be playing in week 10. Do I think Jonathan Brooks is going to come in and be the absolute must-start running back every week? Probably not. It's probably a running back by committee where neither guy is super exciting. And then going over to the receiving usage, I know a lot of people are excited about Jalen Coker for whatever reason. For the love of God, don't buy into it. I mean, really, the guy I'd bet on is Leggett. Leggett leaves the game for a small little portion with an injury, but really misses no time. He runs 28 out of 30 potential routes. He sees the receiving touchdown as well. He leads the team in targets. If you were interested in anybody, it's Leggett, but Thielen's going to come in. It's a bad offense, so I'm not interested in really anything here. I'm going over to the Raiders. Can't be interested in anything at quarterback. They pivot over to Desmond Ridder. Alexander Madison, this turns into a 3-man running back by committee where Amir Abdul is getting a lot of work, so can't start Alexander Madison because, again, the only way you can start a running back that's in a garbage offense like the Raiders or like the Panthers is if they're not in a committee. It's as if they're getting all the work. So that's not the case with Madison anymore. So Madison, 100% not startable. None of the receivers are startable with how bad the offense is outside of Jacoby Myers because Myers does have a 30+% team target share. Myers gives you 105 receiving yards and the 8 receptions. And then obviously Bowers is a must-start player every single week. He was our tight end 1 this week. Going over to Cincinnati, phenomenal day for Burrow where you get the 5 passing touchdowns in a game with no T. Higgins as well. Chase Brown, clear must-start player with no Zach Moss. We had Chase Brown as the buy low running back a couple weeks back. He comes through with the 27 carries, 120 rushing yards, and at the same time, he gives you the receiving usage as well, which is so damn exciting. You get the receiving touchdown. The main storyline here is obviously Mike Gesicki comes through, and Mike Gesicki blows up for the 100 receiving yards and the 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, this is the continued trend. Obviously, we had this with Gesicki last week as well. Now, the thing with this is, if you look at the games where Gesicki's been great, the first 2 weeks of the season and the past 2 weeks, is it just a coincidence that all of those games have come when you did not have T. Higgins? Or is it that the Cincinnati Bengals don't have a great wide receiver room outside of Chase and Higgins, and when Higgins misses, they decide to look to the tight ends a little more often? Gesicki's probably a must-start tight end in any given week that you don't have Higgins, but if Higgins does come back, then obviously we're a lot less excited about it. I'm going over to the Giants. Daniel Jones gets there with the rushing touchdown. You're not starting Daniel Jones any week in the future. Tyrone Tracy still has the vast majority of work. Tracy sees 47 snaps compared to Devin Singletary at 18. Obviously, we're not expecting this to be a great offense, though. Tracy hasn't shown that he's going to have a lot of usage as a receiver. I actually thought Tracy was going to miss this week with a concussion. We had Tracy as a sell-high candidate after the monstrous game against Pittsburgh on a Monday night. I still kind of stand by that. Bad offense, not a great receiving back, or at least we haven't seen it so far this year. Nabers gets you the 11 targets in a game environment where you only have 26 potential pass attempts to look at. So, I mean, some simple little napkin math here. You are looking at a total of 42% of the targets in New York going to Malik Nabers. So Nabers remains that must-start wide receiver every single week. Wide receiver 1. Now is he in the Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase tier? Hell no, just because the offense is much worse. Going over to the Commanders, Jaden Daniels remains a must-start player every single week regardless. Nothing to talk about there. The running back usage is really split between Chris Rodriguez and Austin Eckler. Eckler plays 29 snaps. I mean, hell, Jeremy McNichols even plays 24. Chris Rodriguez plays 20. The reality is none of these running backs are interesting when you have Brian Robinson back in. But for the time being, if you had to bet on a running back, it'd be Eckler. He has the touchdown, and at the same time, you get the usage as a receiver. And then obviously, if you're looking at Terry McLaurin, he gets you the good day as a fantasy option because you have the 2 receiving touchdowns, but the underlying volume isn't really there where you only have the 3 targets, 2 receptions, and 19 receiving yards. But McLaurin remains a must-start player every single week. The running back's not interesting outside of Brian Robinson, and Daniels remains a must-start quarterback. Nothing changes. I'm going over to New England. I started Ramondre Stevenson. Thank God we got the touchdown because outside of that, this dude's a freaking bomb. We had 16 rushing yards off of 10 carries. Guess we can start with Drake May. Drake May can be viable in fantasy. The man had 95 rushing yards this week. I'd be a lot more excited about May at this point than a lot of these other streaming quarterbacks because of his rushing upside. Hunter Henry continues to crush with Drake May under center. You continue to see the wide receiver room spread out to a bunch of different names. Douglas leads the team in targets, but I'm still not interested in any of the receivers in New England. And Ramondre, you get the receiving touchdown as well, which is nice to see. And yeah, Ramondre gets all the usage at running back, which is very encouraging. Just the efficiency is not there. Going over to Tennessee, Mason Rudolph, don't care. If you're looking at Tony Pollard, 3 down back, gets absolutely everything. 28 carries. You get the 3 receptions as well. I do want to reiterate, if Spears is back next week, this Pollard usage probably comes down. And at that point, we'd be a lot less excited about him in what is a very bad offense. But for the time being, no Spears. Fire up Pollard every week. And then looking at the receivers here, there's only one name that's interesting. That's Ridley, who continues to get force-fed targets with no DeAndre Hopkins. He has 8 targets out of 27 total pass attempts. Ridley probably remains somebody you're starting as a borderline flex. Going over to the Bears. So my initial pickup on the waiver wire this week, because I have Brock Purdy in the Flock League, was Caleb Williams. Thank God I pivoted over to Kirk Cousins, because Caleb comes through and gives you legitimately nothing here. And really, Rome Odunze leads the team in receiving. DJ Moore is down at 9, but Keenan Allen has 10 targets. DJ Moore has 9. Rome has 7, so the targets are distributed pretty evenly. If you're looking at the routes run, you have 50 routes for DJ Moore, 50 for Keenan, 47 for Rome. So they're just effectively only running out 3 wide receiver sets. These guys are on the field for every single snap. Cole Kmet runs 41 routes, but Kmet sees a total of 0 targets. And DeAndre Swift is the first and second down back, and Roschon Johnson is the third down back at this point. So it's a little concerning to maybe think that the Roschon usage will eat into Swift, but Swift still had 6 targets, so it doesn't matter. But it looks very difficult to call any of the Bears receivers must-start options at this point. They definitely all need to be on a roster. Like, if you were to get an injury to Keenan, then at that point, I'm very excited about Rome and DJ Moore. If you're getting an injury to DJ Moore, I'm very excited about both Rome and Keenan. If you get an injury to Rome, I'm excited about both Keenan and DJ Moore. But they're just all eating into each other, and there's not enough passing volume here with Caleb under center. Caleb did see an injury, but sounds like he's going to be fine. Going over to Arizona, you only had 154 passing yards for Kyler. So when you only have 154 passing yards in this offense, it's going to be a horrible day for fantasy purposes. Now, obviously, this is a team that's able to run the ball over and over and over again, where if you are looking at this, you are getting 34 total rush attempts. James Conner, one hell of a day with the 107 rushing yards. Get the receiving usage as well. Now, obviously, I started James Conner in the Flock League. What's so damn frustrating is if you told me, hey, Mason, Arizona's going to have 3 rushing touchdowns, none of them go to Kyler Murray, and they're going to run the ball for 213 rushing yards. I would go, oh my gosh, is James Conner the number 1 overall running back in fantasy this week? Nope. You get a rushing touchdown for DeMarcado. You get a rushing touchdown for Benson. You get a rushing touchdown for McBride. Am I thinking that all of a sudden, no, James Conner's losing the job? No, the reality of the situation is, of course, this is not particularly a close football game, so you can't get these secondary running backs involved. Going over to the Jags, they look horrible. Lawrence gets 2 rushing touchdowns, so maybe saves you if you start him in a super flex league, but not interesting in a 1 quarterback format. We were talking about this previously with Bigsby as a sell-high candidate, but when Etienne was going to come back in, it was going to be a split backfield and a horrible offense. Not something you're interested in. Etienne, Bigsby, neither guys are startable. If you look at the usage, Bigsby did have the majority of snaps, if that even matters. And then looking at what you had with the receivers here, Brian Thomas Jr. does run 34 routes out of potential 35, so he's playing every single snap at this point. Now, obviously, you can make an argument, oh, the chest injury is still impacting him. Maybe he's going to be better next week, blah, blah, blah. The usage is there. He's been great all season, and no Christian Kirk means he is seeing every single snap at this point. But yeah, the game was very disappointing if you started him. Evan Ingram sees 10 targets. Evan Ingram will remain a mid-tight end 1 for me going into the future with no Christian Kirk. The Eagles, nothing here changes. Saquon Barkley is still an elite quarterback. Saquon Barkley is still my number 1 asset in fantasy football. Devonta Smith, still a must-start option every single week. The only thing to be on the lookout for is A.J. Brown plays 37 snaps, sees a knee injury, and does not return to the game. So obviously, this is horrendous news if you have A.J. Brown. It will be something that we need to continue to monitor. From what I have read, I don't think that this is a super serious knee injury. I don't think that this is the Stephon Diggs torn ACL that we got a week ago. So in any games where Brown misses, you bump up your expectations with Devonta Smith, and you probably lower expectations with Jalen Hurts, but you start him anyway. I'm going over to the Detroit Lions. You don't really have the passing volume because the Lions can just continue to run the ball over and over and over again. 32 carries to a total of 22 pass attempts. St. Brown still gets there off of only 22 pass attempts. He has 7 targets, gets you the 7 receptions and the receiving touchdown. Laporta looks horrendous. Laporta still is not viable in fantasy, despite being the second leading receiver on this team. Again, you're looking at a situation in which this is just a team that's going to run the ball consistently. Gibbs dominates as usual. Gibbs is just one of the most dynamic running backs in the NFL at this point. David Montgomery actually has the receiving usage in this offense, which is very interesting. Montgomery plays more snaps, runs more routes, and sees more targets than Gibbs. But both guys you start every single week. That doesn't change. I'm going over to the Packers. Jordan Love really disappoints. Obviously, you can make an argument that Love was injured. But I still stand by. I think Love is a must-start quarterback every single week. View him very similarly to Burrow. Quarterback's going to have a ton of passing volume, but not much rushing. Jacobs gets you the 3-down usage. Obviously, Emmanuel Wilson takes a rushing touchdown, which is very frustrating. But Jacobs comes away with the 13 carries. Jacobs, at the same time, gives you the 3 targets out of the backfield. So I don't really have too much hesitation here with Jacobs. Jaden Reed, you have 6 targets. Christian Watson, you have 7 targets. Kraft, you have 6 targets. Chris Brooks, you see 4 targets. Romeo Dobbs, you see 5 targets. Bo Milton, you get 2 targets. Josh Jacobs get 3 targets. Emmanuel Wilson gets a target. On David Wicks gets 3. So again, this is still a team that's going to be spreading the ball out to so many different receiving options here that it is extremely difficult to go through and rank anybody as that elite must-start guy every single week. Reed is the closest thing you have to it as a volatile wide receiver too, in my mind. Now going over to the Rams, Kupp dominates, of course, with the 14 targets as Puka Nacua gets ejected. Realistically, does anything change here? Nope. Kyron, you start every week. Kupp, you start every week. Puka, you start every week. Demarcus Robinson, 4 touchdowns over the past 2 weeks. Demarcus Robinson has been phenomenal. Obviously, he wins the game this week. But with that being said, I honestly don't think you can start him when you have Puka Nacua back in this offense. If you have him in like underdog best ball drafts, congrats. He looks great. Going over to the Seattle side of things, this is a very close game. So you actually get to see some rushing attempts for Kenneth Walker. Where you get the, first off, Geno Smith, still just a weekly streamer based off matchup, right? Falls in the same range of those guys like Cousins. Looking at running back with Walker, you get the 25 carries, the 83 rushing yards. What's actually funny is, with the 25 carries, this is like the worst performance you've had from Walker in a while in fantasy, where the receiving usage isn't as strong. You also don't get the rushing touchdown, but Walker remains a running back 1 for me rest of season, 0 hesitation. JSN absolutely blows up. You get the 13 targets. You get the 180 receiving yards and multiple receiving touchdowns. Now, the question on everybody's mind, and I don't know the answer to, is when Metcalf comes back in after the bye week, is JSN anything more than a week-to-week potential flex option? Or is he at this point now a must-start wide receiver 2 every single week, regardless of matchup, even with Metcalf in this offense? I don't know. We're going to definitely tinker a bunch with the rest of season rankings. I'll have those updated on the site tonight. And at the same time, we will have you a video out tomorrow morning with my explanations behind them as well. But I really do appreciate you. And of course, if you wanted to tail us on the underdog pick for the Monday night game, I'm going Bucky Irving to have fewer than 52.5 total yards against a very tough Chiefs rush defense with an implied team total that puts the Bucs as a bottom 5 offense in the NFL this week, according to sportsbook projections. I do want to warn you, though, I'm also 0 for 17 on our last 17 underdog recommendations on YouTube. But if you wanted to fade me, if you wanted to tell me, you can find that link over to Underdog Fantasy in the description and the comment section. Code FLOCK will give you a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll be getting a free Patrick Mahomes pick, more than less than half total yard for the game tomorrow night. And on top of that, you're going to be getting a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night as well. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address to your account on Underdog Fantasy. That way I can accredit you with that free team review voucher. But thank you again. I really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream before the Monday game.